would be happy to start since you raised some issues about therapy. So I want to sort of backtrack. You talked about attachment and trauma and treatment, and I think there's really a fourth element that I would want to introduce, which is healing or neuroplasticity. So that it's not just this sense of treatment of these poor damaged folks, but I think in very different ways, actually not such different ways, but with a different focus in all three cases, that we're all three talking about what's intrinsic to the individual and what's wired in and what's biological, so that rather than some grandiose sense of the therapist coming in to save the individual, that I think in one way or another the ethos of this conference is very much about activating healing processes and natural biological processes and learning something about what are the conditions biologically the therapist can learn from, whether we're talking about attachment or whether we're talking about emotion or whether we're talking about the autonomic nervous system. So I think that really takes it out of the realm of the transferential figure who's out to save the poor damaged person. And I think that's actually one of the major aspects of the paradigm shift that the field is undergoing. So I sort of wanted to start by really putting that out there. I think that's what we're trying to learn here and use the science to sort of support psychotherapeutic work.
A very good therapist. What I saw was a person who was very kind, which is sort of a good place to start, and a person who didn't have all the answers, and a person who was intensely curious about what's going on, because she's able to hold multiple realities in her mind. And so to my mind, curious enough, Rachel is sort of one of my idealized therapists, namely what she embodies is great intelligence, which you don't come automatically, but also intense curiosity, and when things aren't working, to say, I don't know, and to always try out new things. And I think that's the issue, to regularly say, I don't know. And then when you don't know, you can do something that I recommend to people I work with, is if you don't know, you don't say, you're treatment resistant, like you say, I have not learned yet an effective treatment that might help this person. So let's go on Google Scholar and let's go find out who claims and helps people. That's how I got to know Peter Levine. That's how I got to know Pat Ogden. That's how I got to do neurofeedback. That's how I got to the theater. There were certain things that weren't working with people. And so you keep looking. It's started to learn, and they start learning about complex stuff. And then you keep learning. And always say, I don't know how to treat this. Let me see what else there is. It's a very labor-intensive job.
The whole structure of engaging therapy to right the ship may be, in a way, disrespectful to the client's neurobiology. That's really what I want to start from. Because when you have disrupted neural regulation, you can't get to this higher level attribute of the ability to connect or to interact or to be reciprocal, all these basic principles, including to attach. And when I started to dig into that area, this is really now moving back around 30 years ago, I actually built a simple foundational model. And it's very naive, but it's also useful as a set of metaphors. And the idea is that within our own endogenous physiology, we have individual systems. So we have organization of one system, but then you have coordination among these physiological systems. They produce a manifestation of behavior. Behavior then gets organized, and then you get to interactive behavior. And therapy is very high up because it's about interactive behavior. And this hierarchical model really tells us that disruption on lower levels affect the high level that we're trying to work on. So the simplest level is really a simple part of the autonomic nervous system not being regulated. And you see in terms of the research areas, people have, over the decades, become interested in heart rate variability, which is an area that I was in for decades. And it was rare. Those were rare studies in the early 70s and late 60s. And now there are tens of thousands of publications. But the publications lose what the main objective of the early research was. It was to describe the neural regulation of the heart. The neural regulation of the heart, which is that one system regulating. And when I was doing that work in the 70s, I thought that was simple, but the real question would be, how did the neural regulation of the heart interact with the neural regulation of other systems in the body? And I proposed those types of questions and was told that it was much too complex and much too esoteric, and that I shouldn't even discuss that and not to even deal with that. And I am reminded, I want to actually make one other statement, and that was in 1949, a Swiss scientist got the Nobel Prize. His name was Walter Hess. And Walter Hess got the Nobel Prize for demonstrating that the central nervous system regulates visceral organs. And what he says in his Nobel Prize speech is something that if I put in an article, even today, my papers would be rejected. I would never get a grant. They say I was too new agey, too kinky, because he talks about all of the systems within the body being interrelated. And he says, and interconnectedness within physiology. And that's where we're going, actually, in terms of the mapping of the nervous system, is an appreciation for these interactions. And what I was saying in the late 70s and early 80s was that we can even talk on simpler levels of the manifestation, not in the brain, but in the manifestation of brain regulation of autonomic function. And that served as the foundational part for social behavior and the ability to connect.
Is that trauma changes the brain? It's the one thing we have learned in neuroscience, is the devastating effects of trauma on the brain. And Steve Porter is going to talk about it tomorrow also. Of course, Harry Harlow showed that in monkeys, and he was allowed to torture monkeys. And Stephen Sumi still does it today in the National Primate Lab, is that if you isolate these monkeys, you deprive them, terrible things happen to their brains. And this is not about bad events or just get over it or it's not your fault. It's your whole perceptual system gets changed. And in order to do that, we need to find ways of changing those perceptual systems, which we are not doing right now. We're basically stuck in developing treatments because we're living with our heads up some body part and not really looking at what people suffer from. And as long as we don't make a diagnosis, at my precursor also said, as long as we call something different what it is, we cannot move ahead.
It was a very good book. But I was also blurbing Bessel's book at that time, and Pat Ogden's book, and Peter Levine's book. And I said to myself, there's something common in all these books. And it was this interaction between explicit and implicit, and for you use subjective and you use a different set of words, but it's the same thing. And the issue was the respect for the implicit and the containment using explicit. And all the therapies, so if we go back to yours, which we've done some things together, we've done workshops and wonderful experiences, because I always like to go in with Diana blind and watch her tapes like you watched, and get the visceral response of what's happening. And I always tell Diana what she's doing is she's tricking them to fall in love with her. And once they trust and fall in love with her, like any other, and this is tongue-in-cheek, so I'm going to use the word like any other predator.
Never been called that before. I think I might take it as a compliment.
She leverages the relationship and pushes the client to work. She uses the connection as a resource, which it should be, and she now stretches the client's capacity. So the client is getting that visceral response of the implicit part of the body being challenged, but has an explicit figure in front of her or him that they can see as something that will give support. And so this dialectic between the implicit and the explicit becomes the new personal narrative. And I want to go one step further, and that is, when I talked about neuroception before lunch, neuroception is our body's reaction to cues that we don't even know we're reacting to. But what I forgot to mention, just as William James said, we feel our body's responses. So neuroception, I'm reacting to stuff, I get a visceral response, and now I take that implicit feeling and have to build a personal narrative to make sense out of it. Now, hopefully I'm accurate most of the time, but sometimes I'm not. And when I'm not, my behavior, my interactions are literally hijacked by that visceral state, by the implicit bodily feeling hijacks my ability to relate and to regulate. Yes. And so to bring it all back is I see within all the therapies, and there are a lot of different ones, there are common themes. And the common theme for most of the ones that I've interacted with is witnessing the implicit bodily feelings, developing a narrative, but keeping that narrative contained so it doesn't result in aggressive behavior or self-destructive behavior.
What does a client's posture say about their resilience? Dr. Pat Ogden suggests that we all have a movement vocabulary, and your client's body language may be giving off clues as to how they'll react to adversity. Pat tells the story of a client who suffered a lifetime of abuse and how one small change to her physicality helped her find hope again.
Resilience to me, in terms of a somatic perspective, has to do with movement vocabulary. I think that we lose our resilience when we lose options, and when we lose options in response to whatever's coming our way. Ron Kurtz used to say two things influence the quality of our experience. One is what happens to us, but two is how we react. So in terms of resilience, I like to look at actions that are familiar and easy for clients and actions that are difficult or unfamiliar, because I know that the more options a person has in their movement vocabulary, the more options they'll have in responding to life's stressors, and thus the more resilient they'll be. So if I'm working with a client who has a rigid posture, for example, you know, when they get stressed, they're not all of a sudden going to become fluid and able to respond in a multifaceted way. You know, because the patterns will exacerbate under stress. So if somebody's rigid, they're going to respond with more rigidity. If somebody's collapsed, they're probably going to respond with more collapse. So I want clients to be able to have more possibilities in their body. To have the possibility of being very definitive and, you know, assertive and even forceful, but also have the possibility to yield and receive and open, you know, to have the possibility to reach out in a variety of ways for help, but to also to grasp, to be able to take and pull something for yourself. So I think of actions. I think of Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen's work, where she defined 5 developmental actions of yield, you know, of a restful, receptive stance, push, which we do, you know, in a variety of ways. We can push with just our eyes, reach, grasp, and pull. And clients develop habits of response in that vocabulary. And those habits limit our resiliency. I'm thinking of one client in particular because it was a fairly recent session, and it touched me so much because she'd had such a tough life. She was a sex worker at the time that I was working with her, and she had had terrible abuse and allowed herself to, as she said, she said, I allowed myself to be abused by my boyfriend, like shut in the closet, horrible stuff, you know, horrible sexual abuse. And she was just sobbing that she had, what she said, allowed all that. And she didn't want to live. She said, there's no hope. She said, if a bus hit me tomorrow, nobody should shed a tear, she says. There was one point in the session where her hand went up just a little bit. And, you know, we're always, in terms of the body, we're always looking for those preparatory movements. that we could have predicted from her history, that she, again, was not able to protect herself. So so her movement vocabulary was limited. She didn't have that push. She couldn't assert, she couldn't protect, she couldn't stand her ground, right? So I wanted to expand that vocabulary by creating a context in which she could push. And she felt, she said, for the first time, this feels like hope. Like maybe there's some hope for me. Because we expanded her movement vocabulary. And see, when we're doing that, expanding the vocabulary in that way, we're changing the present moment of how she lives in her body, but we're rewriting history. We're rewriting history, and we're also changing the future. Because when she gets this capacity in her body, she will be more resilient. She will be able to use that in her world, in her relationship.
And it kind of illustrates what happens in trauma. Okay, this represents our energy, our arousal level, and so we're just taking a walk, and our energy is basically moving like this, up and down. If we're taking a run, there's more movement in our energy. If somebody's chasing us and threatening us, then our energy is really excited. Now, what happens in trauma is that we have this tremendous excitation, and then, boom, we're overwhelmed. This energy becomes locked. It becomes stuck in our bodies and our nervous systems. When this arousal, this activation, this hyperarousal doesn't get released, it leads to all kinds of symptoms, not only the classic symptoms of PTSD, like flashbacks and nightmares, which Ray experiences, but to many physical sensations, physical symptoms, chronic pain, chronic stiffness in different parts of the body.
What is the key to resolving trauma?
First, we have to recognize that trauma has emotional effects, it has a cognitive effects, but primarily it's a physiological process. And until we begin to resolve it at the physiological level, it's not possible to resolve the emotional and the meaning issues that that traumatized people have. One of the conundrums in trauma therapy is that therapists are trained and are usually very good at being empathic. And with many clients, that really helps them settle enough to be able to work with their issues. When a person is deeply traumatized, the ability to read others' emotions by their faces and their postures is very much compromised, so that they're really not able to take into that the empathy. And often clients even feel like they've done something wrong because they're not able to take in that soothing, to take in the kindness of the therapist. And then equally, the therapist is often very frustrated because they don't know why what they're doing isn't working. The traumatized nervous system can't take too much activation, as I illustrated with the slinky, because they're overwhelmed. They're easily overwhelmed. And so it has to be done one dose at a time, one small experiential quantum. And an analogy that I use is what happens when you take a strong acid and a base. If you put them together, there's a tremendous explosion. However, if you take one drop of the base and add it to the acid, there's a little bit of an Alka-Seltzer fizzle, and then it quiets down, and then another drop, and then finally it's neutralized. It's neutralized, but without the explosion. And this is what you see with Ray and with traumatized clients in working with this way, is that they come to rest, they come to equilibrium, and their life energy is restored to them. And for me, any trauma therapy really isn't successful until the person reowns their life energy and lives within their life energy.
then the musculoskeletal system, a lot of the other physical systems are the ones that are informing us. And then they're sending a lot of information up to the brain to say, here's how you should understand your internal and external environment.
Right.
That isn't the brain being in charge. And what we do know with interoception research is we begin to act on it before we've cognitively parsed it out. Mm-hmm. So one of the common ones that we would use an example with interoception is what's referred to as the predictive use of interoception. And for most of us, there would be things like, I think I'm getting a cold. You know, you're starting to get sick. You feel these sensations that say, it's stuffy and itchy and And so we're using our interoceptive information to say what's going to happen in the future. Mm-hmm. When we do that with things like safety, with other people's intentions, I feel this thing inside, and so that person must mean this towards me, or I wouldn't be feeling this way. So I feel nervous and I feel agitated and I feel not very safe. So I think that person over there is probably unsafe, and I'm just noticing that. And so I'm really good at noticing this person who's unsafe. Well, what if we're mistaken?
Right.
What if it's us feeling nervous? What if it's us somehow having a bad day about our environment, and now we're making all this meaning about it? Mm-hmm. That's not happening up in our brain. That's not our brain telling us. That's kind of that gut feeling informing us. So there's a lot that happens in the body that goes the other direction, that our brain does get busy making meaning about it. So our cortex is up there happy to say, it's that person over there that's unsafe. It's because I ate that thing that I'm having an allergic reaction to. It's because I'm in this environment and this isn't a known place to me, and so I'm unsafe.
One is our nervous system looks at predictability as a metaphor for safety. So some of what you're describing is a violation of predictability, and that triggers a sense of lack of safety. The issue is, for many people with trauma histories, when their body starts to calm down, and this has to do with therapeutic or other forms of intervention, that calming of the body overlaps with physical sensations of forced immobilization or traumatic induced immobilization. So calming for some people becomes a trigger of trauma, and it creates this re-traumatization. And what I keep thinking about this is that the astute therapist, when they're aware of this, provides, just as you do, this resource of the relationship with the therapist to enable the client to experience it, which is the neuroception, describe the feeling, and change the narrative.
And it was a positive moment. And you said when things are going well, that you would say, for example, stay with me with that. And I caught my breath because it's something I struggle with, because in my training, we were always told, never interpret a positive transference. Now, so I have different thoughts about this. One is, it's not really a transference. This is something that's happening in the moment. And I wondered if that was your thinking about it, or if, any other thoughts?
So first of all, it's a conference on attachment and trauma and attachment in London. And Bowlby got a lot of flack from the psychoanalytic establishment of the time for believing in reality.
To say the least,
So I tend to be with him on that, first of all. Secondly, I actually couldn't disagree more with the idea that one is not to really intervene with respect to positive experiences. And a huge aspect of ADP really has to do with how to leverage those moments of spontaneous and at times fleeting positive emotion. And again, I go back to my definition: positive not only in the sense of happy or joyful, but positive in the sense of something that feels right and aligned, and to take those and actually enlarge them, to make them explicit, and then to work with them experientially, which really just activates a whole different transformational process. and that I think by opting to sort of let it pass unnoticed, so to speak, you know, for fear of interfering with them, is actually depriving the therapeutic process and that particular client, and certainly the dyad, of an extraordinarily important source of energy and a source of transformation.